David always believed that hard work would pay off. He had been working at Wilson Manufacturing for 3 years now, starting as a junior accountant right after finishing his business degree. Every morning, he would arrive at the office 15 minutes early, coffee in hand, ready to tackle whatever numbers came his way. But David wasn't just good with numbers. He had ideas. Big ideas that could save the company money and bring in new customers. He would stay late, working on proposals and presentations, hoping someone would notice his efforts. The problem was, nobody seemed to care what the quiet guy from accounting had to say. Wilson Manufacturing wasn't doing well. Everyone knew it, but nobody wanted to talk about it. The company had been losing money for 2 years straight. Orders were down, and several employees had already been let go. David could see the problems clearly. The company was stuck in old ways of doing business while their competitors moved ahead with modern solutions. Mr. Robert Wilson was the CEO, and he had inherited the company from his father. Robert was the kind of man who believed that because his name was on the building, he automatically knew best about everything. He drove a fancy car, wore expensive suits, and made sure everyone knew he was in charge. But David could see the fear behind all that confidence. The company was Robert's whole identity, and it was falling apart. David had tried to approach Robert with his ideas several times. Once he had prepared a detailed plan showing how they could cut costs by 20% while improving quality. He had spent weeks on the research, checking every number twice. When he finally got 5 minutes with Robert, the CEO barely looked at the papers. "Listen, kid," Robert had said, not even looking up from his phone. "I've been running this company since before you graduated college. I think I know what I'm doing." That was 6 months ago. Since then, things had gotten worse. The company had lost their biggest client, and rumors were spreading that they might have to close down completely. David watched good people lose their jobs while the real problems went unfixed. It was frustrating beyond words. The annual company holiday party was always held at the Grand Hotel downtown. It was one of Robert's ways of showing off, even when money was tight. This year, the party felt different, though. Everyone knew it might be the last one. People were being polite, but you could feel the worry in the air. David stood near the back of the ballroom, watching his coworkers try to enjoy themselves. The hotel had decorated everything beautifully with gold lights and red ribbons. A large buffet table stretched along one wall, and a bar was set up in the corner. Most people were making small talk and trying to forget about work for a few hours. Robert was in his element, moving from group to group, telling jokes and acting like everything was fine. He was wearing an expensive tuxedo and had a glass of champagne in his hand. David noticed how forced his smile looked, especially when people weren't watching. "Not much of a party person, are you?" David turned to see Jennifer from Human Resources standing next to him. She was one of the few people at the company who had ever really listened to his ideas. "Just thinking," David replied, watching Robert laugh loudly at his own joke across the room. "About work?" Jennifer asked. "Always," David admitted. "I keep thinking about the Morrison proposal. If we had just listened to what they were really asking for instead of trying to sell them what we always make." Jennifer nodded. She had been in that meeting too. Morrison Industries had been looking for a specific type of manufacturing partnership, but Robert had insisted on pitching their standard services. They lost the deal to a competitor who actually listened to what the client wanted. "You should say something," Jennifer said quietly. "To who? Robert? You know how that goes." Before Jennifer could answer, Robert's voice boomed across the room. He was standing near an old grand piano that sat in the corner of the ballroom. The piano looked like it hadn't been played in years, covered with a thin layer of dust and some hotel decorations. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert called out, raising his champagne glass, "I want to thank you all for another year of hard work at Wilson Manufacturing." The room went quiet as everyone turned to look at him. David could see the worry on people's faces. They all knew the company was in trouble. "I know this year has been challenging," Robert continued, "but we're going to turn things around. We just need to stick to what works and trust in proven leadership." A few people clapped politely, but most just stood there. David felt his stomach tighten. Robert was still refusing to see the real problems. You know, Robert said, his voice getting louder. Some people think they know how to run a business better than those of us who actually built something from the ground up. David felt his face get warm. He had a feeling he knew where this was going. Robert's eyes found David in the crowd. Take our friend David here from accounting. Always coming to me with his big ideas and fancy proposals. Always thinking he knows better. The room was completely silent now. David felt every pair of eyes turn toward him. His heart started beating faster. You know what, David? Robert said, pointing directly at him. You're always acting like you could run this place better than me, like you've got all the answers. David wanted to disappear. He could feel his co-workers staring at him, some with pity, others with curiosity. Jennifer touched his arm gently, but he barely noticed. Robert walked over to the old piano and patted the top of it. Tell you what, I'll make you a deal. If you can sit down at this old piano and actually play something that doesn't sound terrible, I'll make you CEO of this company tomorrow morning. A few people gasped. Others started whispering. David felt like the room was spinning. But, Robert continued, holding up one finger, when you can't do it, when you embarrass yourself in front of everyone here, you're fired. Done. Finished. You clean out your desk and never come back. The room erupted in nervous murmurs. Some people looked shocked. Others seemed excited by the drama. David stood frozen, his mind racing. So what do you say, David? Robert asked, his voice dripping with confidence. Ready to put your money where your mouth is? Or are you going to admit that maybe, just maybe, you don't know everything after all? David looked around the room at all the faces staring at him. These were good people who deserved better than watching their company fall apart, while the person in charge refused to listen to reason. He thought about all the ideas he had that could save their jobs. He thought about the proposals gathering dust in his desk drawer. Then he looked at the piano. His hands were shaking slightly as he started walking across the room. Each step felt like it took forever. The crowd parted to let him through, and he could hear people whispering as he passed. When he reached the piano bench, David paused. He looked back at Robert, who was watching him with a smug smile, clearly expecting him to back down. David sat down at the piano bench and placed his hands above the keys. The room fell completely silent. Even the hotel staff had stopped what they were doing to watch. This was it. Everything was about to change. David's fingers hovered just above the piano keys, and suddenly everything came rushing back. The weight of the keys under his hands, the familiar stretch between his fingers, the way his wrists naturally curved. It had been 8 long years since he had touched a piano, but his body remembered everything. What Robert Wilson didn't know, what nobody at the company knew, was that David had spent the first 18 years of his life completely devoted to music. While other kids were playing video games or watching cartoons, David was practicing piano for 4 to 6 hours every single day. His parents had immigrated to this country when he was just 2 years old. They had left everything behind in South Korea, arriving with nothing but hope and determination to build a better life for their family. His father worked double shifts at a factory while his mother cleaned office buildings at night. They saved every penny they could. When David was 5, his mother heard him humming along perfectly to a classical music program on their old radio. She noticed how he would tap out rhythms on the kitchen table, his small fingers moving in complex patterns that seemed impossible for a child his age. That's when they made a decision that would change everything. They bought an old, beat-up piano from a family that was moving away. It cost them 3 months of savings, money they desperately needed for other things. But David's mother believed that music was the key to a different kind of life for their son. A life where he wouldn't have to work with his hands the way they did. David took to the piano like he was born for it. His first teacher, Mrs. Chen from down the street, said she had never seen natural talent like his. Within 6 months, he was playing pieces that most students took years to master. By age 8, he was performing in local competitions and winning every single one. The competitions led to bigger opportunities. David started studying with Professor Williams, one of the most respected piano teachers in the state. Professor Williams saw something special in David and began preparing him for national competitions. David's parents worked even harder to pay for the lessons, sometimes skipping meals to make sure they could afford the fees. When David was 12 years old, something incredible happened. He was selected to perform at Carnegie Hall as part of a young artist's showcase. Standing on that famous stage, playing Chopin in front of hundreds of people, David felt like he was exactly where he belonged. The applause seemed to go on forever, and afterwards people came up to his parents crying, telling them how beautiful his playing was. That performance opened doors David had never dreamed of. He was offered scholarships to prestigious music schools. Record companies started calling. There was talk of professional management and concert tours. David's future seemed crystal clear. He would be a concert pianist, traveling the world and sharing his gift with audiences everywhere. But then reality hit his family hard. David's father got injured at the factory. A machine malfunction left him with permanent damage to his back, and he couldn't work anymore. The family's income disappeared almost overnight. His mother tried to work more hours, but it wasn't enough to cover their basic expenses, let alone piano lessons and competition fees. David watched his parents stress about money every single day. He saw his mother crying when she thought no one was looking. He heard the worried conversations they had late at night about paying rent and buying groceries. The weight of their sacrifice became too much for him to bear. When David turned 16, several music schools offered him full-due scholarships. But even with free tuition, there would be other costs: living expenses, travel for competitions, piano maintenance. His parents insisted they would find a way, but David could see the fear in their eyes. That's when he made the hardest decision of his life. David told his parents he wanted to study business instead of music. He convinced them that a business degree would give him a stable career and steady income. He talked about how music was just a hobby, something he enjoyed but not something he wanted to build his life around. His parents were confused and heartbroken. They had given up so much to support his musical dreams, but David was determined. He had seen what financial insecurity could do to a family, and he never wanted his parents to worry about money again. Professor Williams tried to change David's mind. He called it a tragedy, a waste of extraordinary talent. He offered to help, find additional funding, to make phone calls to wealthy donors who supported young musicians. But David's mind was made up. The day David played his last lesson with Professor Williams, they both cried. His teacher made him promise that he would never completely give up music, that he would find ways to keep it alive in his life somehow. David promised, but deep down, he knew it would be too painful to play casually when he had been trained for greatness. David put his piano skills away like a precious photograph tucked in a drawer. He threw himself into business studies with the same intensity he had once devoted to music. He got perfect grades, earned his degree, and landed the job at Wilson Manufacturing. His parents were proud, relieved that their son had chosen a practical path. But the music never really left him. Sometimes, late at night, David would dream about playing. His fingers would move across invisible keys while he slept. He would wake up with melodies in his head, complex pieces that seemed to flow from somewhere deep inside him. Over the years, David had convinced himself that he made the right choice. Business was stable, accounting was reliable, he had a steady paycheck, and health insurance. His parents didn't have to worry about money anymore. That was what mattered. But now, sitting at this dusty hotel piano with everyone watching, David felt like that scared 16-year-old boy again. The boy who had given up his dreams to take care of his family. The boy who had buried his greatest gift because he thought it was the responsible thing to do. His hands were trembling slightly as memories flooded back. The feeling of performing for thousands of people. The way time seemed to stop when he was completely lost in a beautiful piece of music. The pure joy of creating something perfect and sharing it with others. Robert Wilson was still standing behind him, probably expecting David to admit defeat and walk away. The rest of the room was silent, waiting to see what would happen next. David could feel their eyes on him, some people hoping he would succeed, others probably expecting him to fail spectacularly. David closed his eyes and let his fingers settle gently onto the keys. They felt like old friends welcoming him home. For the first time in 8 years, he allowed himself to remember what it felt like to be truly alive. He thought about his parents, about all their sacrifices. He thought about Professor Williams and the promise he had made. He thought about the dreams he had buried and the music that had been waiting patiently inside him all this time. David took a deep breath and began to play. The first note that came from the piano was soft and gentle, like a whisper in the silent ballroom. David's right hand found a simple melody, while his left hand supported it with quiet chords. He had chosen Nocturne in E-flat major by Chopin, a piece that had always felt like home to him. For the first few seconds, David's fingers felt stiff and uncertain. 8 years was a long time to be away from something that had once been as natural as breathing. But then, something magical started to happen. His muscle memory began to take over, and his hands started to remember what they were born to do. The melody grew stronger and more confident. David's touch became more sure, more expressive. He could feel the music flowing through him like water finding its way down a mountainside. All those years of practice, all those hours of dedication, they hadn't disappeared. They had just been waiting. People in the ballroom started to shift closer. The quiet conversations stopped completely. Even the hotel staff who had been cleaning up in the back of the room put down their trays and turned to listen. There was something happening here that none of them had expected. Robert Wilson's smug smile began to fade. He had been so sure that David would embarrass himself, maybe bang out a few clumsy notes before giving up in shame. This wasn't what he had planned at all. The sound coming from the piano was beautiful, professional, real. David lost himself completely in the music. His eyes closed as his fingers danced across the keys with increasing confidence. The notes filled every corner of the ballroom, transforming the corporate holiday party into something entirely different. This wasn't background music or entertainment. This was art. Jennifer from Human Resources felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had worked with David for 2 years and thought she knew him pretty well. But this person at the piano was someone completely different. The quiet, careful accountant had transformed into someone magnificent. As the nocturne continued, David's playing became more emotional and powerful. His whole body moved with the music, swaying gently as his hands created magic on the keyboard. Years of suppressed passion poured out through every note. This wasn't just playing music. This was David finally letting himself be who he really was. Tom from the shipping department whispered to his wife, "I had no idea. How did none of us know he could do this?" The answer was simple. David had hidden this part of himself so completely that even he had almost forgotten it existed. But now, with each passing measure, he was remembering not just how to play, but who he used to be. The boy who had dreamed of concert halls and standing ovations. The young man who had felt most alive when he was creating something beautiful. When the nocturne came to its gentle ending, the room remained completely silent for several seconds. David's hands stayed on the keys, and he kept his eyes closed, not ready to return to reality just yet. The silence stretched on, and for a moment, David wondered if maybe his playing hadn't been as good as it felt. Then the applause started. It began with Jennifer clapping slowly. Then Tom and his wife joined in. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in the kind of applause usually reserved for professional concerts. People weren't just clapping politely because they felt they should. They were clapping because they had just witnessed something truly special. But David wasn't finished. Instead of standing up and accepting the applause, he kept his hands on the keys. The clapping gradually died down as people realized he was going to play something else. David had spent 8 years being careful and quiet and responsible. Tonight, for the first time in nearly a decade, he was going to let himself be fearless. He began the opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most challenging and beautiful pieces ever written for piano. This wasn't the gentle, intimate music he had started with. This was big, dramatic, powerful music that demanded everything from the performer. David's hands moved across the keyboard with incredible speed and precision. The melody soared and dipped, building to emotional peaks that made people catch their breath. His left hand played complex bass lines while his right hand handled intricate runs and delicate touches. This was the kind of playing that most people only heard in concert halls or on recordings by world-famous pianists. Robert Wilson stood frozen near the piano, his champagne glass forgotten in his hand. His mouth was slightly open as he watched David's hands fly across the keys. This wasn't just good piano playing. This was extraordinary, professional level. The kind of talent that people paid hundreds of dollars to hear. The Rachmaninoff concerto is normally played with a full orchestra, but David made the piano sound like an entire symphony. He brought out inner voices and harmonies that most people never noticed. His playing was so expressive that people could almost see the story the music was telling. Mrs. Patterson from payroll wiped tears from her eyes. She had been to the symphony many times with her late husband, and this was every bit as moving as anything she had heard there. "How is this possible?" she whispered to herself. As David moved through the most technically difficult sections of the concerto, his confidence grew even stronger. His fingers found every note perfectly, even in the fastest passages. The music built to incredible climaxes and then dropped to whisper-quiet moments that had everyone leaning forward to catch every sound. The hotel manager had come out from his office to see what was happening. He had hosted hundreds of events in this ballroom, but he had never heard the old piano sound like this. The instrument seemed to come alive under David's hands, producing colors and tones that he didn't know it was capable of. Other hotel guests started appearing in the doorway, drawn by the incredible music echoing through the building. A few people took out their phones and started recording, though most were too mesmerized to think about anything except listening. David reached the famous climax of the concerto, where the piano and orchestra usually battle it out in a display of musical fireworks. Playing it on solo piano required incredible skill and stamina, but David rose to the challenge. His hands moved so fast they were almost a blur, yet every note was clear and purposeful. The music built to one final, tremendous crescendo. David's whole body was involved now, his shoulders and back moving with the powerful chords. The sound filled the ballroom completely, echoing off the walls and ceiling. It was the kind of moment that gives people chills and makes them understand why music matters. Then, with a series of final, thunderous chords, it was over. David's hands lifted from the keys and the last notes faded into silence. For a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The ballroom was completely still, as if everyone was afraid that making any sound might break the spell that had just been cast. David finally opened his eyes and looked out at the crowd. What he saw took his breath away. Every single person in the room was staring at him with expressions of pure amazement. Some people had tears on their faces. Others looked like they couldn't quite believe what they had just witnessed. Then the applause began again, but this time it was different. This wasn't polite party clapping. This was the kind of ovation that goes on and on. The kind that people give when they know they've just experienced something they'll never forget. The applause seemed to go on forever. David sat at the piano bench, still trying to process what had just happened. His hands were shaking slightly, not from nerves this time, but from the rush of adrenaline that comes from performing at that level. He had forgotten how incredible it felt to share music with people, to see their faces light up with joy and amazement. Robert Wilson stood completely still, his champagne glass now empty in his hand. His face had gone through several different expressions during David's performance. First shock, then disbelief, then something that looked almost like fear. The cocky smile he had worn just minutes earlier was completely gone. When the applause finally started to die down, Robert cleared his throat loudly. The room gradually became quiet, and all eyes turned to him. David could see that the CEO was struggling with what to say. This clearly wasn't how he had expected the evening to go. "Well," Robert said, his voice noticeably less confident than before. "That was unexpected." A few people in the crowd chuckled nervously. Jennifer was still wiping tears from her eyes, and several other employees looked like they were in shock. They had all worked with David for years, and none of them had imagined he possessed this level of talent. "I made a deal," Robert continued, looking directly at David. And I'm a man of my word. The room held its breath. Everyone knew what Robert had promised, but nobody really believed he would follow through. Making David the CEO had been meant as a joke, a way to humiliate him. But now, with dozens of witnesses and after that incredible performance, Robert was trapped by his own words. "David Chen," Robert said formally. "Effective immediately, you are the Chief Executive Officer of Wilson Manufacturing." The room erupted, again, but this time it wasn't applause. People were talking excitedly, some laughing with disbelief, others asking each other if this was really happening. Tom from shipping actually whooped with joy, earning him a sharp look from Robert. David stood up from the piano bench slowly, still not quite believing this was real. A promotion to CEO wasn't something that happened to people like him, especially not people who had spent their careers being ignored and overlooked. But here he was, and everyone had heard Robert make the announcement. What nobody knew yet was that 3 different people had been recording David's performance on their phones. Jennifer had started recording during the Chopin piece, amazed by what she was hearing. Tom's wife had captured most of the Rachmaninoff concerto, and Katie from marketing had filmed the whole thing from the back of the room, including Robert's announcement. Within an hour of the party ending, those videos were uploaded to social media. Jennifer posted hers first with the caption, "You won't believe what just happened at our company party. Our accountant is apparently a piano genius and now he's our new CEO. This is real life, people." The video started getting shares immediately. Jennifer's friends couldn't believe what they were seeing and hearing. The combination of David's incredible talent and the dramatic story behind it was exactly the kind of content that spreads like wildfire online. By midnight, Tom's wife's video had been shared over 1,000 times. She had posted it with the hashtag #ChonRichPianoCEO, and people were already using that tag to share their own reactions and comments about the story. Katie's video, which showed the full context, including Robert's challenge and announcement, was the one that really made things explode. A local news station's social media manager saw it around 2 a.m. and immediately called her boss. By 6 a.m., they were trying to contact Wilson Manufacturing for an interview. David woke up Tuesday morning to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. He had turned his phone off after getting home from the party, overwhelmed by everything that had happened. When he finally turned it back on, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The first call was from his mother. "David, what is this video your cousin sent me? Is this really you playing piano? And did someone really make you a CEO?" The next several calls were from reporters. Channel 7 News wanted an interview. The local newspaper wanted to do a feature story. Someone from a national morning show had even called, though David assumed that was probably a mistake. When David arrived at the office that morning, there was already a news van in the parking lot. He tried to slip in through the back entrance, but a reporter spotted him and came running over with a cameraman. David Chen. I'm Lisa Rodriguez from Channel 7. Can you tell us about what happened last night? How does it feel to go from accountant to CEO because of your piano skills?" David mumbled something about needing to get to work and hurried inside, but the damage was done. The story was officially out there, and it was getting bigger by the hour. Inside the building, David found chaos. The phone was ringing constantly, and the receptionist looked overwhelmed. Robert was in his office with the door closed, talking loudly to someone on the phone. Employees were gathered in small groups, all talking about the videos they had seen online. "David," Jennifer called out when she saw him. "Have you seen the news? You're everywhere." She showed him her phone, where the Master Piano CEO hashtag was trending locally. There were thousands of comments from people who had watched the videos. Most were amazed and supportive, calling David an inspiration and saying they couldn't believe how talented he was. But the real surprise came around 10 a.m., when the phone calls started coming from potential clients. The first call was from Peterson Industries, a company that Wilson Manufacturing had been trying to land as a client for over a year. "We saw the video of your new CEO," the caller said. "We'd like to set up a meeting to discuss a possible partnership." Then Morrison Industries called back. Morrison, the company that had rejected Wilson Manufacturing's proposal just 2 months earlier. "We're interested in reconsidering our decision. their representative said. "The story about your company has really caught our attention." By lunchtime, they had received inquiries from 6 different companies. Robert came out of his office looking dazed and confused. The same man who had been ready to humiliate David 12 hours earlier was now watching his struggling company get more attention than it had received in years. "I don't understand what's happening," Robert admitted to David privately. "These companies are calling because of a piano performance?" David was starting to understand, even if Robert wasn't. People were drawn to authentic stories, to companies that clearly had depth and hidden talents. The video wasn't just about music. It was about discovering that there was more to people than meets the eye. It was about a company that had someone extraordinary working there, someone who had been overlooked and undervalued. The afternoon brought even more surprises. A venture capital firm called wanting to discuss investment opportunities. A business magazine wanted to do a feature article about unconventional leadership. And most shocking of all, the mayor's office called to invite David to perform at an upcoming city event. David sat in what was now his office, still trying to process everything that was happening. 24 hours ago, he had been a frustrated accountant that nobody listened to. Now he was a CEO, a viral internet sensation, and apparently some kind of local celebrity. The phone rang again. This time it was Professor Williams, his old piano teacher. "David," his teacher said, and David could hear the emotion in his voice. "I saw the video. I told you that music would always be part of your life. I never imagined it would happen like this, but I'm so proud of you." As David hung up the phone, he realized that everything was about to change. Not just his job title, but his whole life. The question now was whether he was ready for what came next. 6 months later, David walked through the offices of Wilson Manufacturing and barely recognized the place. The tired, worried faces that had filled the building during the holiday party were gone. Instead, he saw employees who smiled when they came to work, who spoke up in meetings with new ideas, and who seemed genuinely excited about their jobs. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it certainly hadn't been easy. David's first week as CEO had been overwhelming. The media attention continued for days, with reporters wanting to know everything about the piano CEO story. Business magazines wrote articles about unconventional leadership styles. The video of his performance had been viewed over 2 million times, and Wilson Manufacturing's website crashed twice from all the traffic. But David knew that viral fame meant nothing if he couldn't actually run the company well. He had spent 3 years watching Wilson Manufacturing struggle, and he had strong ideas about how to fix the problems. The question was whether he could put those ideas into action. His first major decision was to implement the cost-saving plan he had tried to show Robert months earlier. The plan involved streamlining their production process and eliminating wasteful spending without cutting jobs. Robert had dismissed it before, but now David had the authority to make it happen. The results were immediate. Within 4 weeks, they had reduced operating costs by 18% while actually improving the quality of their products. The employees were amazed to see changes happening so quickly, especially changes that made their work easier, rather than harder. David's second major move was to completely change how they approached potential clients. Instead of trying to sell everyone the same standard services, he implemented a system where they actually listened to what each client needed and then customized their approach accordingly. This was exactly what Morrison Industries had been asking for months earlier. When David called them back personally and presented a solution that was designed specifically for their needs, they signed a 3-year contract worth more than any deal Wilson Manufacturing had landed in the past 5 years. But perhaps the most important change David made was cultural. He instituted what he called Hidden Talents Fridays. Once a month, employees were encouraged to share skills or interests they had outside of work. It started small, with people giving short presentations about their hobbies or side projects. Jennifer, it turned out, was an incredible photographer who had been documenting local history for years. Tom from shipping was a volunteer firefighter who had designed safety improvements that other fire departments were now using. Mrs. Patterson from payroll spoke 4 languages and had been helping immigrant families navigate the school system for her entire career. As people began sharing their hidden talents, something magical happened. Employees started seeing each other as complete human beings, rather than just co-workers. They began collaborating in new ways, bringing diverse skills and perspectives to business problems. The photography skills Jennifer had developed became useful for creating better marketing materials. Tom's experience with safety protocols helped them improve their workplace procedures. Mrs. Patterson's language skills opened doors with international clients they had never been able to communicate with effectively. David realized that every person contained multitudes, just like he had. The quiet accountant had been hiding a world-class musician. What other incredible talents were sitting unnoticed in offices and factories everywhere? The changes at Wilson Manufacturing didn't go unnoticed in the business community. Other companies started reaching out to David for advice on leadership and corporate culture. Business schools invited him to speak about unconventional management approaches. The Harvard Business Review published an article about the Wilson Manufacturing model of talent recognition. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Robert Wilson, the former CEO who had challenged David to play piano that night, asked for a private meeting 6 months after the transition. David was nervous about the conversation. Robert had stayed on as an advisor, but they hadn't talked much about what had happened or how Robert felt about losing his position. "I owe you an apology," Robert said as soon as David closed the office door. "And I owe you my thanks." David was surprised. "You don't need to apologize for anything." "Yes, I do," Robert insisted. "I was arrogant and stubborn. I was so afraid of losing control that I couldn't see the company was falling apart around me. I was a terrible leader, and I almost destroyed everything my father built." Robert walked over to the window and looked out at the busy production floor below. "You saved this company. You saved all these people's jobs, and you did it by being everything I wasn't. You listened. You cared about people as individuals. You made everyone feel valuable." "You gave me the chance," David replied. "Even if you didn't mean to." Robert laughed. "That might be the most expensive bet I ever lost, but it was also the best thing that ever happened to this company." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Robert became one of David's strongest supporters, helping him navigate the business world and sharing insights from his years of experience. The mentoring relationship that developed between them became another example of how people could surprise you if you gave them the chance. The company's success continued to grow. They landed contracts with major corporations who had heard about their innovative approach to business. Their employee satisfaction scores were the highest in their industry. Turnover was almost zero, and they had a waiting list of people who wanted to work there. David never forgot the lesson of that night at the piano. He kept a small keyboard in his office and played for a few minutes every day, usually when he was thinking through difficult problems. The music helped him stay connected to the part of himself he had hidden for so long. The old piano from the hotel ballroom became part of the Wilson Manufacturing story in an unexpected way. When the Grand Air Hotel was renovating, they offered to sell the piano to the company. David bought it immediately and had it placed in the main lobby, where employees and visitors could see it every day. A small plaque next to the piano read, "Every person contains extraordinary potential. Sometimes all it takes is someone believing in them enough to give them a chance." The piano became a symbol of the company's culture. New employees were told the story during orientation. Clients often asked about it when they visited. And sometimes during company events, David would sit down and play a few songs, reminding everyone that the most important talents are often the ones we keep hidden. David's parents came to visit the company several months after he became CEO. His mother cried when she saw the piano in the lobby and heard employees talking about how much they loved working there. His father, who had always worried that David was too soft for the business world, watched his son lead a meeting with confidence and skill. "You found a way to use both gifts," his mother told him privately. "The music and the business. I always knew you would figure it out." Looking back, David realized that the night at the piano had changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. It wasn't just about proving he could play music or earning a promotion. It was about learning to be his complete self, to bring all his talents and experiences to everything he did. The scared 16-year-old boy who had given up his dreams to take care of his family had grown into a man who understood that sometimes the most responsible thing you can do is be extraordinary. Sometimes the best way to take care of others is to stop hiding who you really are. And sometimes, all it takes is one moment of courage to change everything.